The throne room at Edirne did not change its posture for a child. That was the first lesson, though no one spoke it aloud. The great hall moved with the same unhurried efficiency it had always possessed. The measured footfall of chamberlains, the low exchange of viziers, the transactional murmur of men who had been managing the empire for decades and saw no compelling reason to alter their arrangements because a 12-year-old boy now occupied the seat at the center of it all. They addressed him, when they addressed him, with the formal language of deference. They bowed at the prescribed angles. They used the correct titles. And then they went on conducting the business of the empire with each other, across him, around him, as though the boy on the throne were a piece of ceremonial furniture, necessary, present, and thoroughly irrelevant to the actual work of power. His name was Mehmed. He was the third son of Sultan Murad II, and he had not expected any of this. Welcome to Portraits of the Past, where we explore the lives of those whose legacies continue to echo through time. The year was 1444. The man who had placed the boy on the throne and then, critically, left, was his father. Murad II was not a man of weak instincts. He had ruled for more than 20 years. He had held the empire together through challenges that would have broken lesser men, crusades, rebellions, the grinding pressure of frontier wars on 2 continents. But in the summer of that year, worn by decades of campaign and administration, pulled by something whose full geometry no historian has ever entirely reconstructed, genuine exhaustion, or a calculated test, or both at once. He had abdicated. He had handed the throne to his 12-year-old son, and then he had walked away to the provincial quiet of Manisa and left the court at Edirne to determine what came next. What came next was Chandarli Halil Pasha. Halil Pasha was the Grand Vizier, the most powerful administrative officer in the Ottoman state, a man whose family had held that position in various configurations across 3 generations. He was experienced, capable, and possessed of the particular confidence that comes from having been indispensable to successive sultans. He managed the transition to the boy's reign with the smooth, unhurried efficiency of a man who had rehearsed for exactly this contingency. The empire was, in his hands, running. The court was stable. The machinery of state continued its rotation without interruption. And the boy on the throne was, in Halil Pasha's private assessment, never spoken aloud but legible in every audience, in the measured patience of his briefings, in the careful way he framed decisions as suggestions and suggestions as commands that had already been made, a problem to be managed until more suitable arrangements presented themselves. Mehmed watched this. He watched all of it. That, above everything else, is what the records suggest. A boy who understood exactly what was being done to him and who did not look away. The Ottoman succession system was not built for sentiment. This was a court that had codified fratricide as an instrument of political stability. It would later be written into law by Mehmed himself, the bitter lesson absorbed and institutionalized. Because the alternative was the kind of civil war between competing princes that had already, within living memory, nearly destroyed the empire entire. Power in this world did not pass gently from father to son with the clean logic of a document and a ceremony. It was seized. It was held. It was demonstrated repeatedly before the janissaries and the frontier lords and the viziers who would follow strength and abandon weakness with the calm pragmatism of men whose own survival depended on being aligned with the winning side. Mehmed had been placed on a throne without the military loyalty that made a throne worth anything. The janissaries, the elite professional infantry who were, in practical terms, the fist inside the Ottoman glove, had no particular attachment to a boy they had not watched win anything. The court moved around him. The empire, for the time being, held, and Halil Pasha managed. The crisis arrived, as crises will, from outside. In the autumn of 1444, a crusading army under the Hungarian king Vladislavus moved east toward the Ottoman frontier. The threat was not theoretical. The border lords required direction. The janissaries wanted a commander they trusted at their head, and what they had was a 12-year-old boy whose father had retired to a garden in Anatolia. Messages were dispatched to Manisa. Emissaries traveled the roads south and west. The request was framed in diplomatic language, and the iron necessity beneath it was perfectly clear. The empire needs Murad. The boy is not sufficient. Come back. Murad came back. He won the Battle of Varna that November. He led personally, drove into the crusading line, killed the Hungarian king, broke the campaign entirely. He was precisely what the empire had needed in exactly the way it had needed it. And then, and this detail matters, he left again. He returned to his retirement in Anatolia. Mehmed remained on the throne. The form of the boy's reign was preserved. What followed was 2 more years of the same managed theater. The court continued its rotation. Halil Pasha continued his administration. And then, in 1446, the Grand Vizier made his move. It was not subtle. Halil Pasha orchestrated a janissary revolt, the Buçuktepe Rebellion, named for the field outside Edirne, where the soldiery massed and made its displeasure known with the particular eloquence of armed men who have stopped taking orders. The janissaries demanded Murad. They would not be managed with diplomacy. A court that had spent 2 years conducting business around a 14-year-old boy could no longer sustain even the fiction that the boy was governing. Emissaries went south again. Murad came back again, and this time he did not leave. This was not a father reclaiming a throne from a son who had stumbled. This was a Grand Vizier deploying his own army to remove a sultan he had decided was inconvenient. Mehmed was not simply insufficient. He had been actively overthrown by the man sworn to serve him, with the soldiers sworn to protect him. There is no surviving record of what Mehmed felt in those weeks. That silence is its own kind of document. The posting to Manisa arrived shortly after. It carried the formal language of governance. Mehmed was sent as governor, a prince undergoing the standard administrative formation that Ottoman heirs were expected to receive. The form was correct. The substance was unmistakable. He had been a sultan. He had sat the throne of Osman, and now he was in a comfortable provincial palace managing tax rolls and border disputes in a city that was a long road from Edirne. where his father ruled again, and the court had rearranged itself around Murad's return as though Mehmed's reign had been a brief, forgettable interruption in a sequence that had now resumed its proper order. He was 14 years old. He had tutors in Manisa. This matters more than it might appear. Among them was the formidable scholar Molla Gurani, a man of genuine intellectual severity who recognized, and sometimes struggled to contain, the particular ferocity of the mind in his charge. Mehmed read with the appetite of a man trying to eat an entire world before it could be taken from him again. Greek, Latin, Arabic, Persian, Serbian. He moved through languages the way other young men moved through fields, taking ground, refusing to stop, building in himself an instrument that would eventually have no equal at any table in Europe or the East. He studied military history with a systematic obsession, not as diversion but as preparation, moving through the great campaigns, the siege records, the tactical treatises, annotating, memorizing, filing away everything that the world had learned across centuries about how walls fell and armies broke. He spread maps on tables. He returned to certain maps again and again. His tutors noted the fixation. One city appeared in his reading with a persistence that was not accidental. It appeared in every language he was learning. It sat at the junction of two continents, ringed by walls that no enemy had successfully breached in 11 centuries, inhabited by the remnant of an empire that had once governed half the known world and now governed a city and a memory, the Eastern Roman capital, the greatest fortified city in Christendom, Constantinople. He was a boy in provincial exile. He had been stripped of his throne and sent away before his voice had fully changed. He had precisely nothing with which to take any city at all. He kept reading. Murad II died on the 3rd of February, 1451. He was 47 years old, worn through by 27 years of war, and his death, while not without warning, landed on the court at Edirne with the weight of something that changes the weather permanently. The throne was no longer Murad's to hold or to withhold, or to hand back on terms he set. The throne passed to Mehmed. He was 19. He had waited for this precise day, not with the passive resignation of a man who simply endures, but with the active, disciplined patience of a man who had spent every hour of the waiting in preparation. He had not wasted a single year of his exile. The languages, the maps, the military history, the long nights with texts that no one thought to watch him reading, all of it had been construction. He had been building something in Manisa, quietly, in a room where power had forgotten to keep watch. He arrived at Edirne not as an heir relieved to have finally reached his inheritance, but as a man who had known for years what he intended to do the moment the door was opened. The court assembled to receive him. The chamberlains moved through their prescribed positions. The viziers took their places, including Chandarli Halil Pasha, still present, still managing, still carrying his private assessment of the young man's worth, his long experience of handling princes who thought themselves more formidable than they were. Mehmed rode in. The men who saw his face that day left accounts. What they described was not the expression of a young sultan grateful for what he had been given. Something older than gratitude looked back at them from under that brow, something that had been sharpened in the silence of a provincial library across 7 years of humiliation and study and the very careful observation of everything that contempt looks like on the face of a man who believes he is safe. Halil Pasha stood in that room. He had managed this young man's first reign. He had watched him be dismissed from the throne he was now resuming. He was a capable man and experienced, and he had survived everything the Ottoman court had placed in his path for 30 years. But he would not be managing this sultan. The paint is dry on this chapter, but the archives are vast. Subscribe and return to portraits of the past. The next exhibit awaits.